This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
Well, we turn now to Brazil, where thousands of police officers joined bus drivers for day 2 of a massive strike in Sao Paulo, just weeks before the country is set to host the World Cup. The workers are demanding better wages. They were met by tear gas when they faced off with strikebreakers. This follows last week's walkout by military police in Recife, another World Cup host city, which drew a crackdown by National Guard and Army troops.
Meanwhile, more than 10,000 people have occupied a major lot next to one of the arenas that will host the World Cup's opening match. They call their protest the People's Cup, and they're opposing the nearly $500 million spent on the stadium, even as their communities lack adequate hospitals and schools. Demonstrations throughout the country have called attention to similar concerns. For more, we go to Washington, D.C., where we're joined by Dave Zirin, sports columnist for The Nation, host of Edge of Sports Radio and SiriusXM. He's been following all this closely for his new book, Brazil's Dance with the Devil, the World Cup, the Olympics, and the fight for democracy. He's going to Brazil to cover the games. Welcome back to Democracy Now!, Dave. I hope you had a good 3:30 in the morning train ride from New York to Washington, and starting your new show on WPFW in Washington. Talk about what's happening in Brazil right now.
Absolutely. Like a friend of mine who's living in Brazil right now, my friend Dylan, he just emailed me to say that the word FIFA, and that's the acronym for the International World Soccer Organization, the word FIFA is about as popular in Brazil as FEMA was in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. In a recent online poll in Brazil, only 22% of people in the country are even going to root for Brazil during the World Cup. I mean, the amount of dissatisfaction with what FIFA has done in conjunction with the Workers' Party is reaching historic heights. And Amy, you and I have discussed these issues around mega events for years: the displacement, the debt, the militarization of public space. And yet this is the first time, really since 1968 Olympics in Mexico City, that you have seen mass demonstrations in advance of the event itself. And that's what makes this historic, and that's why the whole world is watching Brazil right now.
Well, Dave, but what about this, that you have a situation where two administrations of supposed socialist Workers' Party have been involved in the expenditures and the preparations for this cup?
Yeah, I mean, that's very interesting part of this, because one of the things that the Workers' Party has done, first under Lula and then under Dilma, those are the two respective presidents, is they have made efforts to fight inequality. The Bolsa Familia program that guarantees an income to the poorest Brazilians if they take their kids to school and to regular medical checkups has cut inequality everywhere except for Rio, where inequality has actually gotten much worse. The problem is that first Lula and then Dilma told the country very explicitly that the World Cup was not just going to be a soccer tournament. It was going to walk hand in hand with even more developments, more money, more employment, more opportunity for people. And when folks see the gap between the promises for the World Cup and the actuality of what it's bringing, and in the context of actually much smaller growth rates in the country than existed even 3 years ago, that's what's really fueling a great deal of the discontent. Because when you see a stadium being built for $500 million and there's no food on the table, there's no health care, and education has gotten by many measures worse, then it breeds the kind of anger that you're seeing right now.
Dave, in Sao Paulo, thousands of families have occupied an area near the site of the World Cup's opening match outside the stadium last week. Protesters called for more spending on housing, health, and education.
It is shameful, really shameful. Not the stadium itself, but the fact that so much was spent on building the stadium, which has pushed up prices of rent in the area. And while there are no health services in the region, we don't have a basic doctor's surgery or a hospital. Why is that? Because they chose not to spend the money on health or education, but on these works, which have only worsened our housing problems.
Dave, if you could talk more about that.
No, absolutely. I mean, this occupation is so interesting, right next to where the opening games are supposed to be in Sao Paulo. It's very interesting for two reasons. I mean, first of all, the stadium itself is not finished with its construction, and there are real questions whether the stadium will be ready for the opening game of the World Cup. The other part that makes this extremely interesting is that you're seeing the way the Workers' Party is using both carrots and sticks as a way to quell the protests in advance. Like, they are telling the folks in both the homeless and landless workers movements, they're the folks doing the occupation next to the stadium, that they'll talk to them about maybe using that empty lot to build more public housing, while at the same time also sending in the police with the rubber bullets, with the tear gas, and also trying to pass legislation to make demonstrating a crime akin to terrorism. I mean, it's gotten so extreme, Amy, that Pelé, the Brazilian soccer legend, spoke out against the World Cup spending and what's been ignored in Brazil. I mean, people have to understand that Pelé, one of the great athletes of the 20th century, is also one of the most aggressively apolitical athletes of the 20th century. I mean, Pelé speaking out against the World Cup is like Michael Jordan speaking out against Nike sweatshop abuses. It's a wild scene, and it says something that the smoke of the tear gas has even gotten into the eyes of Pelé himself.